I'm real excited to bring our panel up to the stage. You can see their names on the board. Exciting because we have three completely different verticals represented. We've got marketing and IT and information security represented. And I don't know about you, but I've never been to an event where all of these functions have ever been in the same place to talk directionally about the same topic. My observation is they're rarely in the same place. Maybe in the C-suite they're in the same place a couple of times a year, but very often these people are so busy running their own teams, some of which could be thousands in size, that they're not often together in the same exact place to align. And this is a great opportunity for all of us to do so. With that, now and throughout the next 20 minutes, I'll probably take an opportunity a couple times to encourage you to consider getting out of your comfort zone and going to one of the other sessions. So if you came here as a marketer, go to the IT session. If you came here as an information security person, go to one of the other sessions. I think, personally, I believe that there's some legacy org structure really slowing down big companies. And it's no one's fault. It's just the way it is. Much of this digital transformation speak is relatively new over the last 25 years and has come up within the verticals that already currently exist. And therefore, while everyone might be directionally going to the same place, they're going at different speeds. And they're not together, and we often don't understand the challenges and the speeds at which the other verticals are going. So with that said, I'd encourage you to consider going to some of the other verticals to see some of the challenges they're facing. Why don't you guys come on up? Very excited to have Adam from Aldo and Mike from ASCAP and Shika, who is in transition right now and has had a tremendous career with some great perspectives to share with us. We all see it as our role to kind of, provoke a valuable conversation. Time is, short and valuable, and at the end of the day, you guys have all chosen to come out of your offices to come here and hopefully gain a few nuggets of inspiration. At the end of the day, that we're all volunteers here with the aspiration and goal of just sharing some of the things that have been helpful to us. But we ask the same of you. Ultimately, we're all going to get out of this day what we put into it. So in a very light and casual way, I've designed some directional questions just to provoke the right conversations. But we will have plenty of time afterwards for your questions as well. And I'd ask you to really think hard about the things that are challenging you, and feel free now during the end of this panel, as well as continuously throughout the day, to ask those questions, because that's probably where we'll get the most out of this, is getting to know the people around us and learning from some of their successes and maybe some of their failures and challenges as well. So with that, I want to ask the panel to just very quickly, while your titles appear on the agenda and on the screen, tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you really do every day, because titles at this point can be really kind of ambiguous.
Me?
Do you want to go first?
Not really, no, but I will.
Ladies first. Terrific.
So,
Thanks, man.
hi everyone. My name is Shika Hornsey. I'm apparently a former CIO. I am, as Mike mentioned, in transition. I'm emigrating back to the UK. So at the moment, I've been a CIO a couple of times, a CTO, and I've been in transformation for over a decade. For a while, I was a principal architect in Verizon with a specialization in transforming Verizon's largest global customers. This is the 20% that brought in 80% of Verizon's revenue. So I've seen a great deal of transformations from a technology perspective. As I mentioned, my specialty is technology, but that's the easy part. The transformational pieces that are difficult, and most people don't realize, it's actually the people, the organization, and at the end of the day, it's the business. And business is run by people, their desires, their wants, and and revenue. And that's the biggest piece that technology has to address. And that's what I do, basically.
Hello, my name is Mike Wilks. I'm the head of information security at ASCAP, the American Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers. It's a 105-year-old company, and I'm the first security officer. So I have my work cut out for me. It's really easy. Everything is new, everything's great. What I did before ASCAP was I was head of information security for Marvel, and so I know what it's like to be attacked every day, hundreds of thousands of times. I used to make a joke, it was my job to keep Iron Man safe. And now I'm out of that job and working instead in the arts and entertainment and supporting songwriters and distributing basically the royalties that composers and authors put out to stitch together society. So I'm really aligned with the mission. And one of the things that I'm doing, obviously, is protecting the endpoint, protecting the political, all of the private information about all of our membership, and trying to bring it forward, into the sort of modern technology stack. And so, like I said, I have my work cut out for me. It's sort of a greenfield situation, and that's quite rare.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Mike. My name's Adam Starr. Up until about a month ago, I was Vice President of Brand Development and Strategy at Aldo Group. Over the last 2 months, I've begun a transition within the organization to really be a brand strategist and business strategist to help them in their overall transformation. So working with their private label division, which has been in existence for about 6 years, we built up a $250 million private label business. But it's under attack like every other business in existence to a certain extent. Retailers are going direct relative to sourcing, and so this particular division needs to build brands that it owns, that meet a customer need, and they recognize that, and that's something that I'm very passionate about. I'm a brand strategist at heart. In terms of what I really do within the organization, when you sent that question over to us, I thought about it, and it's really trying to get the organization to be future thinking and long-term thinking in terms of goals and objectives and sticking to that plan. We're all under attack, and the needs relative to IBIT in this year are very intense and very real. But if you lose sight of 2 years out, 3 years out, 4 years out, then you're never going to get to that place. And so it's my responsibility that I take on within the organization to continue to make them aware of that.
Awesome. Thank you, team. Appreciate it. So just very quickly, so you understand the perspectives of which I am commenting from, I just left after nearly 7 years of MasterCard, prior Coca-Cola, and prior to that J&J, pretty much leading the digital transformation from a marketing and communications perspectives. So while this isn't about me, the comments I throw in, I want you to know where they're coming from. That said, I'd like to start at that high level and just kind of ask you guys briefly to talk about what does digital transformation even mean in your organizations? It seems obviously that we've been on this path now for decades. And are we ever really done? And is there something else you may call it? So what does this mean within your verticals and your companies? Or past companies?
Okay. To me, digital transformation is actually evolution. It's part of, at this point, especially given what's going on in our private lives with technology as well, the customers are 9 times out of 10 driving transformation because of customer demand, and that's driving the business, and therefore the technology, IT within a business. So it starts at the people level. As in, for example, I've had comments thrown at me in various IT organizations where people will say, I can do this on my smartphone, how come I can't do this within the organization where I work? And a lot of times it's a security thing, so I'll let you address that piece. But sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's because the organizations are old, and not the organizations themselves, but the companies are old. And that's not a bad thing. It just means they've been around for a while. And typically I've worked for companies that are about 100 years old. That's usually the hallmark, and sometimes the processes are 50 or 60 years old. And just because it's old doesn't mean it can't change, but that change is painful. And that's the piece that we have to cater to. To me, transformation is evolution, and it's a journey. It's not a goal where you get there and say, okay, fine, I'm done. I've transformed. That's never the case. You might actually have certain milestones within that journey to say, okay, I've achieved what my goals are, or short-term, long-term, it can be within 5 years, but it doesn't mean that you've actually stopped transforming, because there's, just like there is in human beings, there is in companies, there's 3 stages basically. There's survival, there's surviving, there's living, and then there's thriving. Most companies want to go for thriving, and they don't know how to get there. Some people, actually, and some organizations, are actually happy with surviving. But that surviving still means transformation because the world around them has changed to make them relevant. Because if they don't just survive, then they go by way of, say, the dodo, et cetera, where they can actually become extinct. And some people, and so it depends on what transformation means in a company by company, enterprise by enterprise perspective. And at the end of the day, I think because it's their businesses, it's all about the metrics. You have to have a firm goal of what success means to you, how to measure it, and how to understand that you've gotten there. And that changes depending on the organization, the enterprise, and where you are.
Should we continue the slide? So I had one quick story I wanted to tell. I think one of the first major brands that I worked on in an earlier life was in San Francisco, working south of Market for a company called Organic. And we had the pleasure of launching Starbucks.com in 1998. So talk about digital transformation. They didn't have a website. We made the website. It was an early day. It was the heady days of the .com, rise and fall. I like to think of it as the roaring 20s of my generation, and it was great. I mean, because we got to build rounded corners, right? That was the big design challenge, right? We wanted to make Starbucks not look like a box, and so it was so hard to make rounded edges on things. And we had so many discussions about how to implement this, and we used all of the best technology. Not actually, Microsoft donated all the hardware, so it ran on Windows. But it was a challenge, and there were a lot of things that you had to do to make it work and to launch it. And Starbucks is something completely different now, right? Different technology stack. It's gone through many years of digital transformation since. But what I like to use is an old sort of ancient Greek philosopher's approach to how you might classify digital transformation. You can't step into the same river twice. And so if transformation is this river, it's constantly moving. So even if you come back to the river tomorrow and you dip your foot into it, it's a totally different river. And so it's an evolutionary thing, like you were saying. And I think you have to figure out what's an appropriate part of the river that you want to navigate. Or do you want to be in a nice slow oxbow and have it kind of like paddling along, and drinking a beer in an inner tube? Or do you want to raft, and go over the rapids and transform your organization to the next stage quickly? And so I think you need to find appropriate challenges for your organization, and then set out those goals and success marks before you do it. Because if you set your requirements after you've launched your transformation, everyone's going to argue as to whether you got there.
I keep on passing. Can you guys hear me without the mic? So Aldo began its digital transformation probably about 15 years ago. And the reason why it exists today is because it began it 15 years ago. If it hadn't, then we'd be dead, along with the retailers that you've read about who are dead, because they probably started, if they did begin, a little bit thereafter. We ended our digital transformation, I'd say, 2 years ago, because if you call it a digital transformation, in my opinion, then you're not really speaking about what you need to be talking about. Because your competition now that's disrupting you is not speaking in that way. They're developing solutions based upon a really deep insight of customer needs, and they're executing against those without any type of definition of real versus digital versus synthetic versus AI versus whatever. They're just developing the experience that needs to develop. And so for us, we are now entering into that phase. What is the role of bricks and mortar within the ecosystem? What is the role of e-com within the ecosystem? What is the role of social within the ecosystem? What is the role of mobile within the ecosystem? And how do they all live congruently so that the experience is fluid? The biggest obstacle relative to a legacy retailer within all of that is KPIs, is measurement. Because you've got siloed components within your organization that are being accountable to measurement and KPIs that are in an archaic world that haven't caught up to the way that the customer is experiencing your product and your brand. So for me, digital transformation, if it's being discussed in that way and those words are being used, then that's a problem right out of the gates.
Awesome. So you guys touched upon just about everything I had hoped that you would. So my attempt to provoke that apparently worked pretty well. You talked about process, you talked about evolution, you talked about HR, talent, you talked about even what it's called and if and when it's ever done. I think it's terrific. Briefly, if you were to call it something else, does something come to mind? And what I'd propose, and this is just off the top of my head, but you'll get where I'm going, is customer and growth focused process improvement. We're not at all talking about technology or digital because that's how you do it. The data and technology is the how. But, you know, whatever we call it, is there anything else that you guys are calling it if, in fact, you think you're done?
Yeah.
Or moving it?
Use the mic. Oh, sorry for the video. It's customer obsession.
Okay.
That to me is what it is.
Any other talk in the organizations you guys have worked for as to what this may be called?
From a label perspective, not really, but I would agree that it starts at the customer level.
Good.
And customer focus, customer obsession, I think that's a very good idea, a very good term, because at the end of the day, it's these enterprises are not transforming because they want to, because at the end of the day, it's just too much disruption. They're doing it because they need to, and the reason they need to is because they have to stay in business. And that's all because of the fact that the customers they're not even demanding it. It's actually much more subtle than that. No customer will actually come up and say, okay, you need to change, and therefore an enterprise changes. That's not what happens. The customers will quietly go to other people, their competitors, or come up with something new on their own that the company should have been able to provide that they didn't. And it's that quiet, I guess that quiet leaving that people or enterprises are trying to mitigate and trying to guard against. Because if they don't change, then their customers will start leaving and or have already left. And as everybody else in this room knows, that it takes a lot more effort to gain back a customer that's gone and has had even a mediocre experience, not even a bad one, than it does to actually get a brand new customer in the first place. So then to retain customers in the first place. But so basically they're doing this because they have to, but it's being driven passively from the customers, not from demand per se, but just expectations, because the technology is changing and it's becoming available in the marketplace first, which is almost a first in human history, because years ago or decades ago, corporations had far more money than individuals, and they would actually drive technology change. But that's ever since mobile phones actually started, and that, just about a couple of decades ago, and the internet, that's made a completely, it's skewed the model where it's actually being driven from the outside in. And the inside, where the corporations are, they're trying to catch up. And actually, now the good ones, as like Aldo, for example, they're not only trying to catch up, they have caught up, but they're now projecting forward, trying to make it future-proof. We're trying to figure out, okay, fine, this is where our customers will probably be in the future. We need to get ahead of that. Mm-hmm. And that's where the thriving comes in. And those are the enterprises that thrive from a transformational perspective.
Terrific. I agree. Each of you have kind of mentioned timing in one aspect or another. You mentioned 15 years of digital transformation. You mentioned the first website in Starbucks, and you're mentioning the first cell phones. It is kind of amazing when you think about how long some of this stuff has been around, and the fact that it's really not new. Most of the people that are in the space talk about how fast it's moving and how fast it's changing. But does anyone kind of remember when the first banner was done? From my perspective, marketing and advertising, that's kind of a seminal moment. Any guesses?
Early 90s.
94. It ran on Hotwired by AT&T, and it simply said, I thought it was brilliant, I guess it's debatable, simply said, have you clicked here? You will. It was rather brilliant, but it was 1994, and I only bring it up because that's 25 years ago. So here we are, in a day when people are questioning, viewability, and they're questioning trust, and they're questioning privacy and the targetability of these things, but they've been around for an awful long time. And I guess I just throw it out there, one, as an observation, but two, as a hypothesis that we can't take 25 years to get the next piece right. It took us this long to get this piece right, and it's debatable about whether it's right or not, but we're going to have to, evolve our adoption and our effective use of these things an awful lot faster. So with that, and the title of our panel about digital transformation, so what's next? Loosely with, topics like agile development processes and automation and GDPR relatively behind us, what's next? What's your hottest, biggest challenge now over the next, 1 year out from your perspectives?
So Aldo's not there. Thank you for that. But the reason why we're not there addresses your question. We have 800 stores in North America. We should have 550. It's a destination retailer for shoes. It's not a brand experience. And retail, the bricks and mortar component of our business, needs to fulfill on that need. We need to relook at what retail, from a bricks and mortar standpoint, provides relative to the customer experience. And if we look at the transformation over the last 15 years, where we used to seek information on our screens and get educated by our screens, and now we transact on our screens, we're now seeking information and getting educated in the real world. And for us, that's a really difficult transformation for us to break through, especially with the fleet the size that we have. How do you right a ship that fundamentally needs to change the rule of what the physical space is within its business model to something completely different? That's definitely our number one challenge. The second challenge is, as we look at all of the digital native brands that come into the space, and we look at digital native brands that are going into adjacency spaces, whether it be music, whether it be travel, whether it be food experiences, whatever the case may be, we need to humanize our brand in a way that they have. The concept of transparency, how you tell your story, purpose-driven messages, cause-driven messages. These are all aspects which are naturally in the DNA of these brands that are coming up and disrupting us. And that's a whole other level of education, of development, of indoctrination throughout the entire organization that represents a real big challenge, again, for a company that's been around for 45 years, that has 800 stores in North America, and then another 1,800 stores around the world with partners. These are big, fundamental shifts. But I believe that, we're on the way there, and it's important for us to be able to recognize these things and push through, even when you face the adversity that we faced. So really for us, it's how do you make what you've been stuck with, this anchor, this massive oil tanker of 800 stores in North America, how do you transform them quick enough to be able to be relevant relative to today's customers' needs?
So I'll tackle a little extension of that, and that's simply how it's going to affect your business. And I guess it's relatively obvious. We wouldn't be here if we weren't in business. But what's your biggest challenge, and how's it going to affect your business? Is it going to be growth, or is it going to be survival? Is it survive or thrive? I kind of like that.
Well, it's going to be growth.
Right. Good. I figured that was for you. I want to make sure these guys touch upon that.
I think the first question was what's sort of the new thing now that we've gotten some of the other challenges like GDPR out of the way, or at least we're in our second year now, I guess, of GDPR. One of the things that I thought would be useful to share, it's not terribly ASCAP related in the music industry, it's just in general about job descriptions. What is the job description that I need to write that doesn't exist, that helps me bring in a new skill set with a new title that you may not have had before? So I was thinking about this, and I heard it put, I think it was at RSA, somebody talked about privacy engineering and putting out a job description for a privacy engineer that's at the intersection of application security, database, legal, and InfoSec. And so you have this privacy aspect that needs to sort of be shared among the organization. You need to design for privacy. You need to implement privacy, and you need to execute it at the end and measure it and be compliant. And so the idea here is that we shouldn't be in the business of implementing security features. We should be in the business of implementing features securely. That's the idea of making sure that it's not just InfoSec that signs off on going to production at the last minute from UAT to prod. You want to do what's called shift left. You need to move all of your automation and all of your security testing into the sandbox and dev environments. And that's what helps, I think, permeate the culture of privacy and security throughout the organization, much like people tried to do with automation and DevOps and QA. And then one other term I thought would be useful in this context was, instead of saying legacy, you were often looking for other words. And so one of the words that I've found is sometimes softer, is called heritage. So think of it as a heritage system. It was right for the time it was built, but that time may be gone now. And so, think about the requirements that changed and the context for the application or the platform that changed. So when you have a heritage system, put it to bed, take it behind the bar and shoot it, but give it some respect, and put a tombstone on it and say it was a heritage system, it was legacy, yes. It was built on .NET 2.0 or something, and it shouldn't be running in the year 2019, so let's stop that. But from a security and privacy point of view, I think that's the challenge. And the one other word that I'd like to throw out is mindset. There's several books on the topic, but basically you can bring in a DevOps tool chain, you can bring in all of the best roadmaps for the future, but if you don't change the mindset, you're not going to win. You're not going to get there. The mindset has to change. People have to think about being a lazy sysadmin and automating everything and checking in their code into a repo. Infrastructure as code. These are the kind of the themes that I got from this year's RSA about what we're doing to make it into DevSecOps instead of just Dev and Ops, or even just DevOps, I think is also an older term, a heritage term as well now.
I'd say, from what I've seen, that the biggest challenge now is data. And it's a question of how do you get data? What do you do with it? How do you interpret it? How do you keep it safe? And I think at the end of the day, that's basically what all of transformation ends up being about, because that's what companies and enterprises are after, because that's how they can actually run business intelligence to figure out how to thrive and how to get better, possibly bigger, depending on what their particular metrics are. But at the end of the day, it is about data, and that's what, from a security perspective, that's what everyone else is trying to get. And that's what you're guarding against, to try and make sure that your data is safe and no one else can get it. But you can actually get some intelligence out of that data. And so, but it comes in many forms. And from a security agility perspective, it's about getting data, crisp, clean, actionable data. Not insights necessarily, but it starts with the data. The insights come afterwards. But the data has to be accessible, and that's where agility, the processes, the entire transformation effort is about. And I think the laws, as we've noticed from GDPR, et cetera, that's what they're trying to protect as well. And I think that's the beginning. It's compliance rules will change, but at the end of the day, it will all be about the data.
I got just a quick comment leading into the next question about privacy and data. And my comment is rather obvious, but I think in most of the companies in which I work with within my verticals, the technology piece it's never done, but it's relatively behind us now in what's necessary to harvest and collect and protect and analyze data. There's, 4,500 companies supposedly in the MarTech and AdTech community. However, the next biggest challenge, again, from my perspective, is turning it into profitable growth. So what? So you got all this stuff. Are you really actually moving the stock price? And I think that's one of the biggest challenges, again, from my perspective. Turning that around in the questions, we talked about privacy, we talked about data. We do have the ability to do some unbelievable, personalization, whether it's on owned, or earned platforms, or even in paid perspectives. But there's been some backlash, and there's been a lot of talk about backlash. I'll provocatively talk about how, GDPR obviously has had very few people opt out, percentage-wise. In fact, last number I saw was 0.4 of 1%. After all these years worth of preparation of giving people an opportunity to opt out, have. Now, that may be debatable, that number, and where they came up with it. But at the end of the day, I guess my question to the panel is, where are we going next with this? So we spent a lot of time, energy, and money to have massive personalization and to have data. But there's been some backlash and perceived backlash. Where do you foresee that going? And is your perspective any different from your geographic view? Because I know you're heading off to Europe and have been in Europe, and you've been in Europe as well. Just your high-level view from your perspective. Where's that going in the next 12 to 24 months?
So I'm wearing a green badge. I'm a marketing guy, not the technology side of the equation. And I guess that's becoming pretty obvious relative to where I start from in terms of answering my questions. I'm all for personalization as long as it's providing value to the customer. If it's personalization that is chasing the same end personalization like happy birthday relative to all of your competition, then it's going to have a backlash. It will hurt your brand. And it's the same thing as chasing promotions, chasing percentages off, whatever the case may be. So for us, if we are able to use our data to find an insight relative to our customers and serve against a specific need, then we're all for it, and we go in hard relative to it. I'll give you an example. We recently developed a hotel partnership program where our goal was within, let's call it 4-star hotels, Sheraton's, Marriott's, develop a program where Aldo can be of benefit for visitors at those hotels. And in our research relative to our customer and their journey from an acquisition standpoint of our product against a customer journey relative to a hotel journey, we found a pain point. Right now, people are really disabled, mostly females, from purchasing while on vacations because they don't have enough room in their bags for the boots or the shoes that they purchase while on vacations. They can purchase t-shirts, they can purchase dresses, they can purchase items that fold up a lot smaller, and they're able to get that in their bag, and they want to shop. But there's really, whether it be a subconscious or a conscious block relative to purchasing shoes while on vacation. And that's something that we found through deep insights relative to our customers, grabbing data during these journeys. And we're developing a program where, in partnership with hotels, we will offer a free delivery service, whether it be from our stores that comes to their doors in Iowa or wherever they happen to be, or through partnership with the hotel to just open that up. And that's one of many examples. So for us, that's really what personalization and data needs to represent. In terms of 18 to 24 months down the road, it's more of that. It's absolutely more of that. And what we're finding is the more that you cross-reference against adjacency journeys, so you're in this category and you look at your customer in a food category, you look at your customer in a music category, you look at your customer in a travel category, you're going to find some really interesting nuggets and opportunities that your competition hasn't found.
One of the things I think is useful for us for data, ASCAP has about 700,000 members, and that includes, Justin Timberlake, Katy Perry, Bruce Springsteen, but also somebody that just wrote their first song. And so we have this huge range, right? And oftentimes what I'm finding in the data and personalization space is that there's this confirmation bias that's happening often in a product team. They'll say, okay, we know our customers want to do this, but really our customers want to do everything, and we can't program and design and build for everything. We have to figure out what's the customer journey, what's the user case, the user story that we want to focus on with a particular feature. And one of the things I think would be good for everyone to sort of remember is that you're supposed to ask the data a question and then get an answer. You don't walk up to the data with a bias and try to get the answer you want out of the data, because that's what happens in confirmation bias. You say, I think our people want to do original work registrations with a mobile app. I don't think so. If you ask the data a question, you will find out how many people are using this feature now. And maybe there's a little bit of a chicken and egg. They would use it if you made it better, and you get into some debates about that with product, and where we spend our money. But for those 700,000 members, we collected about 1.2 billion in revenue last year, and we distributed 1.1 billion. So we really have like a lean and mean 10% operational cost on distributing the money to our members, and we're a member-based organization. So we can't really take $1 million gamble on a web app or even a mobile app if we don't have a solid story to tell as to why we're doing it. And I think that goes back to defining your success metrics beforehand. Don't say, well, we want to put out a press release saying we now have a mobile app. That's backwards. That's reverse teleology. That's what is the thing for? Why are you doing it? Make sure that the data supports that, and don't be biased. I don't think we do enough A/B testing in general. I think the technology's been around for years to see, do people like a left nav login button or do they like a top nav login button? I don't see that happening often enough. People need to discover what works rather than just say that they know it because they're the product person or they're the project manager or the CEO even. So.
Anything to add?
Actually, yes. Based on what you've just said, data can also be dangerous. The interpretation of it can be dangerous if it's interpreted incorrectly. And I'll give you an example. For example, those patients that have pneumonia and have, say, compromised immune systems or are in their 90s, they have an unusually extraordinary survival rate for those particular types of patients. So their insurance premiums for things like that are actually extraordinarily low. And that's driven by the data and by analysis. So that's what underwriters actually cater to. However, I've seen that particular piece of data used, for example, for hospital admittance rates, where a hospital that was automating and using AI used that same set of data to, say, somebody who was in their 90s had pneumonia, to turn them away, saying, okay, fine, your survival rate will be great, go home. They wouldn't admit them into the hospital. They would, if somebody with a compromised immune system would show up with pneumonia, they would send them away, saying, go home, you'll recover. The piece that they missed was the reason for that kind of recovery, is that usually when people like that go to a hospital, everybody and his grandmother shows up to take care of them because it is so fundamentally dangerous for them. It is far more dangerous for somebody who's in their 90s versus somebody who's younger to have pneumonia. It's far more dangerous for somebody with a compromised immune system to have pneumonia than it is with somebody with a healthy immune system. Sometimes they can just walk around for months. The reason I'm saying this is I had pneumonia for 8 months and didn't know it. So anyway, so that only came out after the survival rate of the patients that were turned away went down. So the hospital couldn't figure out what was going on because it was completely contrary to the initial data curves that they had. Upon investigation, they realized that they were using the same data that insurance companies use for whatever reason. But while I think our next big challenge is data, I also have a healthy respect for data, a borderline fear, because it can be reinterpreted the wrong way. If you don't have the use cases explicitly defined with hard edges and you know exactly what you're using data for and what, especially in pharmaceuticals or in situations where it's life and death, that's even more important, But retail, unless it's the company that's in question, and depending on what type of retail, there are certain areas and industries that you can get away with being a little fuzzier with data, but for the most part, data needs to be treated with an enormous amount of respect, and that's part of the things and part of the discipline that I don't see across corporations or enterprises.
Terrific. Burning questions from the audience. At the beginning, I said, at the end of the day, our goal here is to make sure everybody walks away with a handful of nuggets they can really apply to their business. Do you have something specific you want to ask of these three different functional areas of people that have gone through this quite a few times? Unfortunately, I think in order for the camera, you need to say it loud or come up to the mic.
Okay. You had said earlier in terms of privacy engineering, is there any particular discipline you would want people to start from, say someone in a software background, a networking background, or a development background?
I actually think it would be nice to see IT and the sort of law education kind of cross and do some hybrid programs. I think NYU is working on something like that, where they're taking like a hybrid curriculum and taking legal people into IT and vice versa. One of the fun things I suggested to one of the NYU professors I was talking about this with was put some of your IT aspirants in this IT track at NYU, put them in front of a mock deposition and have them give an incident response for a data breach, and go over some actual trial questions that have been used, and really scare the bejesus out of them, and make them understand that legal is your friend. Legal is not there to say no to the things you want to do and how you're going to do it. So I think that you could actually start in other disciplines besides IT and different subfields within IT.
Without thinking through your question at all, and the marketing guy in the room, you need anthropologists. You need the young of today are growing up with their whole life exposed. They have no care in the world for keeping things private, for what we grew up with as issues or hang-ups that we had relative to exposing ourselves. And if we don't understand that as organizations, then it's going to be difficult for us to create the policies and the regulations that are necessary. But I'm not the person to be answering this question from a technical standpoint.
Yeah, I just add that, at the end of the day, I have a child of college age, so I've just done a tour that many of you have probably done, and I was fascinated at one particular school. So while not selling that school, I'll leave the name out. They're building an entire campus, not just a building, around cybersecurity. And I believe it's one of the very first, whole curriculums on cybersecurity, rather than just some type of introductory course that I saw at other schools. I walked into one school and they had a room and they had fancy screens up and they showed all kinds of attacks going on. And when I asked the first question, the guy said, "Well, I'm just an intern. I didn't even take my first class yet." So that was a school that was posing to be in the business. But this other school showed me architectural plans, and it was quite impressive. And without, surprising him, this gentleman up here in uniform is in cybersecurity for, our men in blue here, or men in green, and teaches at West Point. So nothing other than an observation that this is a long journey we're on, and that it's probably no one right answer for any company, but a joint cross-functional group laser focused on this and working collaboratively across all the crazy silos that's going to be vital for success in virtually every business. Whether it's shoes or it's credit card records, at the end of the day, this is some really sensitive data that has got to be secured. And of course, has also got to be used for profits. Any other questions from the audience?
I have one.
Yes, sir.
From a marketing retail perspective, but I think other B2B companies have similar issues. When you're looking at legacy systems that are inherent, and from the marketing perspective, we're pushing for more digitally friendly information. You're looking at truncated information, limited information that's not digitally friendly. So now you're starting to go out and create multiple databases. What fears or what advice do the panelists suggest when looking into setting up these separate systems and then at some point, integrating them into an ERP or a combined repository?
I'm sorry. I'm not in a position to answer that question properly. I wish I was.
I think you're talking about master data management. You have to reconcile all these different touch points that might have come in from legacy systems, heritage systems, things that come in all caps, right? And systems that aren't really, like you're saying, digitally friendly. It's difficult. You might want to outsource that. That might not be your core competency. You don't want to, in a digital age, try to build up, even in IT. I see a lot of people moving, their core email systems off to the cloud, because why do you need to have a 4 or 5 person running Exchange, for you on-prem? You'll do a worse job of it than Google or Microsoft at running that for you. And so master data management, everyone's trying to reconcile unique legal entities and foreign identities. And so it's even a problem at Marvel. We had the challenge of 5,000 characters, and only a few of them people know about. And some of the non-A-list characters became really famous recently, like Black Panther, or even Captain America wasn't even considered a Class A franchise. But how do you get people to understand all of the complexity that's in the data, and how do you sort of build that master data management platform so that you have one source of truth, right, across the organization and everyone's subscribing to it. That's a core competency to build up the ability to query and curate that data set and to dedupe it and use artificial intelligence to find, two things like Jerry Garcia versus Jerome Garcia. This is one of the artist problems that we have with our repertory at ASCAP. People register, and change their names over time. What do we do with Prince and the artist formerly known as Prince? There's all sorts of things that you have to keep track of over time. And so, that's a real big data challenge. That's why I think that data scientists ought to be up there reporting into the senior management team and setting the data strategy for the organization and helping maybe to find good outsourcing partners for it.
I'd say from a technical perspective, the sooner the consolidation occurs, the better. And sometimes from heritage, legacy platforms, when you can't do that, the best and quickest way around it is to abstract it out, basically build another middle layer where everything feeds into, and that starts as your abstraction or your single point of truth, so to speak. And then eventually, because everything else, you basically just, it's kind of like when you're filing, you have a miscellaneous file, which is deadly, but that's what you're creating from a data perspective. And then if you do it correctly, and you know that you're doing a miscellaneous file with certain, so you're building a mosaic, not necessarily a melting pot, but you know that, and you're actually building it sooner rather than later, because at some point you can't function as with disparate pieces of data or disparate systems. You end up as building a Frankenstein's monster, and you're trying to build a human being. It doesn't work. So the sooner you can do that, the better it is. So, however, if you've got issues like that, then the quickest way to do it. And I'm saying this because I've been a customer for most of my life, but I've also been a consultant and a vendor. So the vendors that actually do this from a systems integration perspective, they'll throw in an abstraction layer, and that's what it's like an umbrella, but everything feeds into it. So from a quick perspective, and that's what your BI and all the other like business intelligence comes off of, but that's what you do.
I'd just add from a business perspective, I've learned, often from more mistakes sometimes than successes or equal amount of mistakes. And the only thing I'd add is while it's different for each company, I've run the gamut from as many partners, having the single best niche solution you could possibly have for this, and this, and, managing a suite of 50 partners and thinking I've done it well, all the way to trying to get to as few as possible. It's not possible, and it won't be in the foreseeable future to get to one almighty company, whether it's Adobe, Oracle, Salesforce. None of them have everything, but it is my current position that as few partners as possible is best, because while I was proud to have assembled the single best stack of 50 different companies out there, you can't predict their future and who's going to buy them and how stable they are, and the complexity in managing them made me collapse. So that's just my own personal experience. We are coming up at the end of the session, so the last thing I want to do is just kind of remind you of this concept of legacy, or as Mike called heritage. It's only my observation that these terms are often referred to when we're talking about technology, but I propose that whether it's processes or thinking, and I'll give you some examples, processes and even how we recruit talent and how we write job descriptions, or whether it's organizational structures, that most companies are kind of suffering from this idea of heritage or legacy processes, organizational structures, technologies, and therefore it's holding them back. So as I said in the opening, I'd encourage each of you to try and get beyond your comfort zones today and maybe go to one of the other sessions. You came here very specifically for probably more IT or more information security or more marketing, or if you're in another room, more for marketing or something else. But I'd really encourage you to try and get outside the box, because I think at the end of the day, again, my observation is in one way or another, that's holding back a lot of companies, is while everyone's well-intended, they're working at different paces. And they're chipping away, but they're getting incremental improvements and not necessarily transformational change. That's my little plug for the day, and I think we're right on time. Jason?